Every label along the spectrum is about information processing. There isn't anything about a spectrum disorder that is only physiological. There are other disabilities that are physiological in nature. We don't know enough about the spectrum to know how much of it is physiological. We know it's neurological. It's about information processing. It's about how information goes into the brain, how it's processed, and how it goes out. Any disability along the autism spectrum impacts the ability to focus on relevant, meaningful information. That means having good filters, being able to take in what you need and leave out the rest. It's about being able to retrieve relevant, meaningful information. A lot of things go into our brains. We have a vast amount of information in our long-term memory. To be able to go back into the long-term memory and retrieve and take out what you need, only what you need, and to leave behind what you don't need is a struggle for people along the autism spectrum. For example, a student with ASD or with Asperger's that has an intense interest, desire to talk about a specific feature or topic, would go into their long-term memory and bring out too much of what's back there, not being able to filter that and to discern how much of that information can be absorbed by another listening individual, or even how much of that information is needed to problem solve or to relay an idea. So for a concrete example would be a person with Asperger's giving you too much information. On the other hand, you might have a student with autism not giving you enough information, because the ability to retrieve relevant and a sufficient amount of meaningful information from the long-term memory is impaired. Sometimes that information doesn't come in a sequential order. Sometimes all the pieces of the story are mixed up. It makes sense to the child that's telling the story, but to the one who's listening, the order of events and the order of events and the prioritization and relevance of any of the details added to the story are just out of order and out of balance. And then for them to be able to focus on meaningful information and retrieve meaningful information in relation to other experiences, most of us, when we think and process information, we rely on a foundation of prior knowledge with which we attach new ideas to old ideas to create new concepts and to make sense of what we did know in relation to what we now know. So you take new thoughts, old thoughts, bring them together in relation to other experiences, and then have completely new ideas about the world and about people and about things and events. This is difficult for students with autism. They also struggle in their ability to review for understanding, meaning, and clarity, to be able to go back and assess and to synthesize and evaluate the information that they've taken in. Because here again, it's difficult for them to see things from multiple angles. Students with autism struggle with perspective taking, and that means that they have a hard time knowing that what's going on in their brain isn't the same thing that's going on in your brain. That the way a pickle tastes to them, they believe that that pickle tastes the same way to you, or the way a fabric or color or texture looks to them, they believe that it looks the same to you. The way an experience is perceived in their own mind, they believe that that's much the same that you see it. They're unable to conceptualize that your mind might be different than theirs. So then it appears that they lack empathy, that they don't understand where you're coming from, and they don't share they don't take interest in what's coming out of your head if it's not like what is inside of their head. So when we develop therapies and educational programming for students with autism and Asperger's, we look at the ability to, we look at perspective taking, and we teach them, we have to literally teach them that other people feel differently than they do, and then help them through role playing and imagery and and playing and games and call and response. We teach them how to see into another person's head by picking up on social cues and tone of voice and words that are spoken and eye contact and whether or not a person's walking away or walking towards us. So all of these things that we take for granted, that we just know intrinsically, do not come easily for students on the autism spectrum. So essentially, ASD, or disorders along the autism spectrum, are reflective of a defective integration system. And these defects impact the ability for children to be able to apply meaning to the stored events. They have plenty of stored events in their long-term memory. They're able to take information into their short-term memory, but they have a difficult time applying meaning and context and elaboration, different perspectives, and evaluatory thought to those stored events. So what might that look like or feel like, and how could that affect learning? It means that you get students who are very rote in their responses. These are students that are highly dependent on regularity and familiarity. They look for extremes. They are more in tune to blacks and whites and linear straight line thinking. They tend to be inflexible, and the opportunity to present new ideas and new concepts and new information to them needs to be approached with a lot of patience and a lot of creativity and the willingness to do a lot of repetition. Also, to learn what they're already interested in, what matters to them, and what really floats their boat, so that you can use that kind of as an on-ramp to bring in new information. Next, we're going to talk about, we're going to do an overview of assessment. Now, in the next class, EDUC 721, we'll go into depth with the issue of assessment and how that's done. But I wanted you to know something about this ahead of time, so that you know how the diagnosis is acquired and what the diagnostic criteria look like, what the process is like to diagnose a student with autism. So the initial diagnosis begins through parent report and observation. Oftentimes it's the parent, it's the mother that notices something is not quite right. Later on, as we discussed with high-functioning autism, it may be that the teacher is the one who is the first responder, the one who notices the characteristics first. And so usually that's confirmed through the observation of more than one person. It's usually not just the opinion of one parent or one teacher. It's the observation of several family members or other teachers, and sometimes even peers, that help to determine a diagnosis is necessary. So the assessment of autism measures and defines the scope of their abilities and disabilities. And the ASD evaluation is most concerned with finding learning and thinking differences, the automatic learning of critical life skills, how well they learn, how quickly they learn, how easily they pick up life skills just through cues and observing in their environment. We look at developmental skills, looking to see if developmental milestones were met and if their socio-emotional development seems normal, that their peer relationships and their relationships with authority figures. We look at language, motor skills, how they run, how they jump, whether they can move quickly with clarity and accuracy, or if they might be clumsy with their feet, if their motor skills are slow and sluggish. We look for, as well, academic skills, whether they are ready to learn, whether they are ready to learn on time, whether they know numbers and they know their letters, whether they're able to sound out words and handle multisyllabic words. They're able to find meaning in what they read. And if they can handle, in math, it would be multiple step processes, formulas, algebraic processes. And then we look at functional skills, the level of independence they have in their home and community. How dependent are they on other adults to navigate their world? How able are they to meet their needs, to say what they need, to ask for and go after what they need appropriately, and using pro-social communication and having reverence for the needs of others as they meet their own needs. The nature of autism affects how a child performs during testing and how the child communicates. So when we go through the assessment process, we have to be mindful of these things, that the reliability of any standardized test is challenged due to the broad discrepancies of visual and motor tasks, the inconsistent performance of any one task, in that there could be little motivation by a child with autism who has limited ranges of interest and generally will not work hard unless that interest is being tweaked or ignited. So they may not perform well if they're not interested in what's going on. And then the receptive and expressive language deficits are really integral in the assessment process, because we're measuring what's going on inside of their mind. And if they can't get that information out, this is not going to be an effective or accurate assessment process. And if they're not understanding the questions or understanding exactly what it is that you want them to say or communicate to you, that is going to have an impact as well. So receptive and expressive language deficits can significantly impact the assessment process. When we plan for the assessment, we want to go after the best possible way to test that student. So we look at how the child communicates. Some children, if they're nonverbal, they use a communication board or they use pictures to communicate. Maybe we're working with a child who's highly articulate but isn't able to apply a lot of relevant meaning to what they say. We also need to know what they understand, the depth of the language that they are able to understand, when and how they communicate that they need breaks, and what it looks like when that child's getting tired. If the child isn't able to tell us that they need to go to the bathroom, that they're tired or they need a snack, they may begin to perform poorly in the testing process. So we need to know how that child best communicates and what sorts of nonverbal cues the child might give us if he or she needs a break or is starting to fatigue in the testing process. We also want to have parents and teachers observe the testing process so that they can let us know, as diagnosticians or the ones that are doing the testing, whether or not that child is performing at a level that we can expect them to perform. Oftentimes parents might say, you know, they're looking kind of tired, or this isn't typical of this child's behavior, or this isn't typical of his performance, we might want to retest. So it's good to have someone that knows that child to be there during the testing session so that they can confirm that the child is performing at an optimal level. We also want to chunk the assessment and not tire the child out, not overexpose them to too much testing, too much of the testing material all at once. Students with autism and Asperger's can become obsessive in their desire to examine and look at things, and may go so deep and may develop some anxiety during the testing process if too much is presented to them at once. So they need breaks, and preferably from day to day. If the testing doesn't need to all happen in one day, that's good. Sometimes it needs to, but it's good to chunk the assessment even over a period of days. It's also important that the child feels safe with the one doing the testing, so establishing rapport in the warmest and most creative way that you can. If you're part of an assessment team, it's important that child feels safe and feels that they can trust you. We also want to be sure in any testing procedure, whether it's autism, Asperger, ADHD, any disability area, that we use both standardized and unstandardized measures. There are strengths and limitations to all types of testing, and we would never address a child's disability with a diagnosis that is the product of only one type of testing. Here's a list of all the different types of standardized tests that could be used in the assessment process when we're looking for any type of disorder along the autism spectrum. We look at the Childhood Autism Rating Scale, and this This test is done through direct observation. A child is put in a classroom or in a learning situation, and then observers watch the child and code the child's behavior. The Stanford-Binet Intelligence Scale is basically an intelligence test, as is the Wechsler Intelligence Scale. Then there's the Wechsler Preschool and Primary Scale of Intelligence, and that is for much younger children, I think through age 6. And then the Wechsler is, I believe, age 7 through 18. But both of those tests have been normed for those age groups. There's the Bailey Scales of Infant Development that just tests for appropriate achievement of developmental milestones. The Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales tests for affective behaviors, and I believe involves some checklists. There's behavior assessment system for children and social communication questionnaires. The Bracken Basic Concept Scale Revised. Gilliam Asperger's Disorder Scale and Autism Rating Scale. All of those are mostly, they are either through self-report and then parent report and teacher report, and these are rating scales, a number of questions where the child either reads the question or is offered the question, and they rate themselves either a 5 or a 10 for the most extreme, or a 1 for the most minimal expression of any one of those item indicators. And then we have the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, the ADOS. This is most often used when autism is suspected. The ADOS is a complex form of assessment that involves direct observation and some analog testing and situations, some tasks, some things that the child does. The ADOS requires some significant training on the part of the teacher or the diagnostician, but it's effective and it's a best practice and used often in many school districts. In a functional assessment, we also want to look at the things that are not measured by standardized tests. We look at these essential components come through the process of interview, observation. We prioritize objectives and determine whether or not the child, how much of the assessment needs to be in the social and the communication domain, based on what parents have let us know and teachers have let us know about the deficits that the child seems to be demonstrating most. And then we determine what does the routine or task demand. We look at what the assessment task or the process of assessment demands of the child. Is this something that the child's going to be able to perform? Will they know how to perform it? Do they need to be taught how to perform that assessment task before it's administered? It's really important that we know what the child is able to do, because if we test a child beyond what they're able to do, we're not really measuring what they are able to do. If they aren't able to speak with any kind of fluency, we're not going to use testing measures that are completely reliant on verbal communication. If we're using tests that are taking a look at for example, their abstract thought or concrete thought, we want to know something about what that child is already able to do, because if we use inappropriate assessment tools, we're not really going to get an accurate measurement of this child's strengths and abilities. The choosing of assessment tools happens with a team. You'll never do that on your own. That'll happen through the IEP team. You'll have the autism specialist, which you eventually will be, and we'll talk more about the tools that you would have to choose from in our next class, EDUC 721. But this is just a brief overview of what the assessment process looks like. To conclude this lecture, we would normally, if we were having face-to-face, we'd have a discussion about family issues and the impact of autism spectrum disorders on family life. And instead of us, because we're not in a face-to-face setting, I'm going to have you listen to 2 podcasts that explain the process that one set of parents went through to assess their son for autism and ADHD. And I think in listening to these podcasts, you'll get an idea of what parents and families go through when they are first confronting and negotiating for the needs of their child and confronting the reality of autism and communication disabilities. So it's my hope that you will enjoy this and that you'll glean something wonderful out of it. I will now take you into the free final thought slides, and you will have the opportunity to complete these questions and to post and give me your feedback. Thanks so much. Don't worry about the report of the Minnesota Senate Autism Task Force. I should have taken that off the slide and didn't do that, so you can disregard that. Thank you. Final thoughts number 1. In one paragraph, list some of the early indicators of autism and at least one reason why those indicators are sometimes missed until a child enters school. Final thoughts number 2. What's the most central differentiation between autism and other areas of disability? In other words, what makes autism unique among other disability types? And I just need one paragraph from you. Final thoughts number 3. Having read the article Broken Mirrors, are the authors suggesting that autism is inherited as a genetic condition or acquired after birth with epigenetic origin, or is there a proposed mix of both genetic and environmental factors involved? I just need one paragraph here. And I did want to note that I know that this is a challenging article to read, and even if some of it was difficult to understand, I just want you to answer this question with your best assumption, and you won't lose any points for being wrong, but try to support your answer with references from the article.